God Alfredo's here. Our state and federal lobbyists are here. We paid you guys to come.
It shows you that we like
All right, let's get this unruly crowd seated. Please, panelists, please join me up here. And I think we got enough chairs. All right. Very conscientious of you, Pam. Appreciate that. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for those that found your way to this place. It's not easy to get here, and we appreciate the effort. I'm Matt Peterson, the CEO of the LA Cleantech Incubator and co-chair of our Transportation Electrification Partnership. And just excited to host this conversation. Thanks to our friends Amy and everybody at the Climate Registry. Thanks to Mike Swords for organizing everything, and to the team that supported this. The insurance commissioner and I talked about convening this conversation because there's an important opportunity as California is once again leading the way on clean trucks, to see how we can accelerate the progress of getting the trucks in place. Of course, one of those things that we need to invest in now is the charging infrastructure for those trucks that are here, and many more coming, thanks to the leadership of Leanne and her colleagues at Area Resources Board, the governor and the state legislature. But in LA, we have two ports, Los Angeles and Long Beach, where 40% of the goods come through into the United States. And it's the largest source of greenhouse gas and air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from transportation in aggregate in LA, with the trucks, trains, and ships. So how do we accelerate progress? And our transportation partnership has set some ambitious targets to achieve by the time of the Olympics. 40% of the zero-emission drayage trucks to be zero emissions, and 60% of the delivery trucks to be electric medium-duty delivery trucks. And we've been partnering with the state on some blueprints on where charging infrastructure should go, and are launching a national city climate innovation challenge on zero emissions delivery. We'll announce next week with 9 cities across the U.S. to learn from what California and Los Angeles is doing on these topics. And without further ado, I want to just jump into the conversation. I want to start with our esteemed insurance commissioner. Commissioner Lara, I mean, you just announced something important yesterday. I'll let you talk a little bit about, but also you've been a leader on zero-emission trucks representing the Long Beach port and the corridor of 710, knowing firsthand what the impact is on frontline communities there. Can you talk to us about the deployment of zero-emission heavy-duty trucks and how it's critical to California's climate goals? And what's the role of insurance companies, and how can they use this opportunity to expand their support for GHG reduction?
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here. And, this is an issue that is very personal to me. Growing up in Commerce, East LA area, next to railroads, and for us, the lack of green space. We used to play in, parking lots of companies around Union Pacific Boulevard. And so air quality and these issues are critical. And as we see that, trucks and heavy-duty vehicles may account for 4% of the overall transportation sector, they amount to 25% of GHG, gases from the transportation sector. And so getting a grasp of this and encouraging insurance companies to be part of this proactively, right? As regulators of insurance throughout the state and around the country with my counterparts, we realize that if we're going to continue to incentivize companies to create EVs and heavy-duty trucks and vehicles, we really have to look at the insurance angles around here. And so one is, how do we use insurance to incentivize these green technologies? And then two, how do we collect the data to better understand the risk associated with the creation of these trucks, so that then with the data, we're able to look at not only policies, coverage, risk pools, and all the other things that are critical to deploying the trucks that we need, especially in California where we have very clear guidelines. And so the conversations with insurers are like, look, we are not backing down. We're going to keep, investing in these technologies, and you have to be part of the solution. And a lot of the pushback we get is just the uncertainty of what a truck looks like. What is the risk, the physical risk, the technological risk? How much does that cost? And we can't determine any of that without data, which is important for us as we got an important bill signed in the legislature this year that allows the Department of Insurance to collect this data to be able to understand what we need to move ahead and what are those risks so that we can reduce that and get to a point where we're actually talking about these new incentives and new creative insurance products that are going to cover these trucks as we continue to all work together. And you're starting to see now the Department of Insurance working with the ARB on this together. So we're embedding again, I said yesterday, insurance can no longer be an afterthought when we talk about climate. It has to be front and center because it's without insurance, we're never going to get to meet our goals. So it's very important that we're having this discussion here today.
Thank you, Insurance Commissioner. We also talked about it in another context recently about CARB's great community mobility options program, some of the challenges around insurance, and you've been responsive to you and your staff, Leanne, so thank you for that. But insurance plays a critical role in this transition to zero emissions. Speaking of the Air Resources Board, you don't have a security phalanx around you, Leanne, but you are, the most important climate regulator, I would say, in many ways, here at COP28, and your leadership has been so phenomenally important. Can you talk to us a little bit about the big picture, the importance of California, the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, and how important is the rule in terms of reducing GHGs and how much you're relying on this sector to achieve CARB's goals? And tell us a little bit about the progress we're making on the way to zero emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. Really happy to be here to share the work that we're doing. First of all, as Commissioner Lara said, particularly the heavy-duty sector has an outsized impact on air quality and climate, impacts communities along freeways, near ports, and so making significant progress in that sector will not only help us achieve climate goals, but will also result in millions and millions of dollars of health savings and save people's lives. So in California, we have a suite of 3 critical regulations. We have the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation, which will require 100% zero-emission light-duty sales by 2035. We have Advanced Clean Trucks, which requires manufacturers to introduce increasing numbers of zero-emission vehicles into the market. And we have Advanced Clean Fleets, which will require fleets to purchase these electric vehicles. Or zero-emission vehicles. It includes hydrogen fuel cells as well. And I think it's so critical in achieving these goals that insurance is not a barrier to achieving the goals. And the challenge we're running into is we keep hearing that insurance is becoming a barrier in a lot of different ways, right? For instance, some rental car company insurance packages or credit card rental insurance packages don't cover electric vehicles because they consider them like specialty vehicles. So it's like, you're renting a Ferrari or something. And it's like, no, it's just an EV. We're hearing challenges from buildings, right? Apartment buildings that don't, whose insurers push back on them for installing charging infrastructure in their buildings. We are hearing from companies that are purchasing fleets of heavy-duty trucks and are running into insurance challenges there. So it's been really great collaborating with Commissioner Lara and his staff so that they are hearing the same thing we're hearing and can help us build the solutions that we need, because this has to be a success. And I will tell you, we are ahead, right? We are ahead in light-duty vehicle deployment. We are ahead of our anticipated targets of medium and heavy-duty vehicle deployment. We are even ahead in the numbers of DC fast chargers in the state of California that we planned for. It's still not enough, I will tell you, as somebody who does a lot of road trips in my EV, it's not quite enough yet. But, I think it's important to celebrate those successes, that we are ahead, we are making good progress, and we want to make sure that the insurance industry doesn't slow down that progress. And that's why having these kind of conversations is so critical to our success.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's exciting to see the progress, and yet we know the challenges ahead. We've been convening Harbor Trucking Association and others, and we hear the mixed stories about which led to your legislation you sponsored, of how some truck operators are having a tough time getting the insurance they need for the trucks, and so we really have to figure this out. With that, speaking of the insurance industry, we're excited to have Amy Barnes here from Marsh McLennan. I actually met your colleague randomly last year at COP and started a conversation on this very topic and led to an ongoing dialogue. I really appreciate your being here as head of climate and sustainability strategy at Marsh McLennan. Talk to us a little bit about you're focused on a few things in this sector, including batteries. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like and a little bit about what the insurance industry is doing from your perspective on decarbonization and some of the commitments made.
Very happily. Okay. So I'm not going to be quite as coherent as the prior speakers. I'm probably just going to vomit a load of facts and then we figure out how they all relate. So we do have insurance challenges with EVs, and actually, if we start back with the manufacture of EVs, even for the car manufacturers, moving from ICE to EVs are struggling. And this is where I think engagement, and this is exactly what we're doing here, can really help. So one of our clients who's looking to start EV manufacture, they've asked us what are the insurance issues. And so we've come up with a risk management strategy that you can only have one shift of batteries in the manufacturing facility during any one time because the accumulated risk is too high. Okay, so I can design my process for that. There are sensors that need to be in place, cooling facilities, so we can reduce the cost of insurance and improve the risk management, because the cost of insurance is a consequence of either a poor quality risk or a poorly understood risk, to your point around data. But we do have, there have been a lot of significant fires as a result of lithium-ion batteries, and we should be clear that this really is a lithium-ion issue, not a solid-state issue as battery technology evolves. So we also need to be clear with insurers that you may have lithium-ion challenges. That doesn't mean you have challenges with all EVs, especially with Toyota's new line coming out. So there's actually even helping the manufacturers get insurance. Then when it comes to the vehicles themselves, and I'm not talking about charging yet, but just the vehicles themselves, the challenges are the fact that especially for bespoke vehicles, the repair networks are immature. And that means it's a longer time and a higher cost to repair a vehicle. And I have some, I'm not so good with remembering numbers, so I highlighted them in bold here. Let me find them. There was some research done that shows that to repair an EV, now this is cars rather than trucks, it costs 25% more to repair an EV vehicle and it takes 14% longer. So especially if you're providing someone with an alternative cost, that's a significant additional cost. So if you take a lot of the HGVs, the feedback that we're getting from insurers is that retrofits they find easier to comprehend because they think retrofits are going to be faster to repair because the existing repair infrastructure is there, that there's less challenges with the technology and getting the supply chain sorted than bespoke trucks. And so some of that is we've got to mature the supply infrastructure as well. When it comes to the charging stations, again, we should talk to the risk management community. The risk management community, if they had their way, would have the charging stations sort of a mile away from the buildings. I exaggerate, but certainly kind of 150 meters, and that doesn't work. If you need them in multifamily dwellings, those charging networks are going to be far closer. So we need to think about telemetrics and other ways of monitoring the risk qualities. And that's one of the plus sides that insurers are telling us about EVs generally, is they love the data capture that they get from the vehicle themselves, so they can monitor for battery degradation, and so they can potentially see in advance about thermal runaway. And so there are features of EVs that make them a better risk management generally, in terms of sort of the inherent EV-ness of them. The other risk management aspect is actually we have better driver safety because they typically have better cameras, they have better equipment inside to help drivers drive better, more safely, to feedback where drivers may need additional safety courses. So there are some plus sides as well. They're not making it into insurance premiums yet, but we need to see them. So that's kind of some of the intrinsic things with EVs. Another positive, and it's sort of aligned with a lot of the work that Commissioner Lara has been doing in the US around net zero commitments, is a very large cohort of European insurers have made net zero commitments in their underwriting portfolios. And those commitments are largely around property casualty insurance, but also around auto insurance. So insurers such as Allianz have committed to 30% reduction in emissions from their auto insurance by 2030, and they're not going to get there without insuring EVs. Swiss Re have made similar. Even IAG, domestic Australian insurer, 70% of their premium comes from auto, and 70% of their premium from auto, they've committed to net zero by 2050. They have no choice but to get on board with EV. So I think some of this is a maturation issue. Doesn't mean that the friction isn't there at the moment, doesn't mean that we don't have to work hard to reduce the friction, but I do feel very optimistic about the trajectory.
Thank you, Amy. All right, Pam Keeley with Environmental Defense Fund. Thanks for being here despite your cold. Given all the ongoing climate work in California, what makes the transition to zero-emission heavy-duty trucks particularly important, and what has been challenging this far from your perspective?
Well, thank you for having me, and I think a lot of the panelists have covered some of the really critical pieces here for why this transition is so critical. Perhaps as someone who's slightly outside of the California bubble, I'll start by thanking California for just incredible leadership in this space. And as someone who's responsible for state climate work across the U.S. For Environmental Defense Fund, I see every day how powerful California's models are in advancing conversations in other policy areas in states across the country. So thank you to Team California. As we heard from Commissioner, the transportation emissions, greenhouse gas emissions are, they're the fastest growing source of GHG and a massive air pollution problem. We heard the 5% of vehicles are medium heavy duty trucks and buses, but a full quarter of transportation emissions are from these vehicles, and importantly, over 50% of the mortality linked to air pollution from transport can be linked directly back to the medium and heavy duty vehicle fleet. So the transition of this fleet can really have an outsized impact, not just on one of the largest growing sources of greenhouse gas emissions, but also on really critical public health indicators. And it's a sort of it's a big opportunity, but it's also a big challenge. I think we're all able to get the Amazon package when we want it, and then sort of the rise of on-demand shipping and delivery. We've seen the GHGs from these sources double since 1990. It's pretty significant. And there are 72 million people across the U.S. that live, close to freight routes. So there's the convenience is powerful, but it is also a very big challenge when thinking about GHGs and public health impacts. Obviously, huge benefits to the transition, climate benefits, health benefits have been estimated over $1 trillion in benefits from actually dealing with the health impacts associated with this pollution. EDF did a study recently looking at about a $50 billion benefit in the U.S. alone from the supply chain associated with the production, manufacturing, and sort of deployment of medium heavy duty trucks. So there's a lot of value here, but there are some challenges. On the challenge side, probably point to two, both of which California is really working hard on. First is upfront costs. That can certainly be still a challenge, particularly for small fleet operators. And it's been exciting to see some of the work that California has been doing to support partners with like HealthStart and ARB to really come up with innovative financing options for helping leverage incentives, have those incentives go further to help small business owners and small fleets really be able to operationalize the transition to electric trucks. But there's more to be done there. There's sort of, despite the cost savings over time, it is always very challenging to sort of wrestle with a higher immediate price point, and the sticker shock of that can be challenging, particularly when there aren't necessarily clear ways to guarantee that residual asset value as the fleet exists over time. So that's one area that I think is important and critical for further work. Infrastructure for charging obviously would be the other big one. I think there are challenges both on the electric side, but also on the hydrogen side as well. And the legislation from last session that California passed, Senate Bill 410, that really helps reduce the time for new charging infrastructure to get connected to the grid. That's a critical step forward. At the same time, there's still a lot more that needs to be done in terms of allowing the sort of pre-build strategies that enable grid-connected infrastructure to get authorized ahead of the demand. And that's going to be a really sort of critical driver leverage point moving forward to help to help have the infrastructure sort of keep pace with the growth of these fleets that we're going to need to see.
May I just come back on your cost point? Because we've been working with a number of OEMs who are trying to come up with a lease package that includes the insurance, because it can be such a barrier, to reduce the capex up front. And actually, our estimates are that the 8-year total cost for a leased EV with the fuel cost is lower than the 8-year cost. And by having a lease agreement where it's a monthly payment with no commitment, I think some of the OEMs could be doing a lot to help.
Yeah, that's great.
Great, thank you both. We've been focused on the California ports. I mean, we talked about LA and Long Beach being the two biggest ports complex in aggregate in the U.S. Yet they thankfully have AQMD and ARB regulating them. Other ports do not. Yet at the same time, we know helping other ports around not just the West Coast but across the country to move to zero emissions is important. Do you want to talk a little bit about, Insurance Commissioner, what opportunities are there to help make progress collectively?
Absolutely. I think the important part as we move forward is not only the pushback, but even from other regulators, is just the lack of data. And without this data, we're not going to be able to, one, set the goals, and then especially when we're trying to meet our net zero goals, right? And our EV and our GHG reduction goals as well. And so as I talk to other regulators around the country, they're really looking to California in terms of this data call that we're going to finally do, where insurance companies are going to, really give us the landscape of where are we in terms of not only EVs but heavy duty vehicles, the deployment, the price points, and all these things that right now we're just kind of grasping. And so this is why it's critical for us to get this data call going. We're going to do this in February, and we're going to do it as quickly as possible so that we start looking at what the data looks like, so then we can then start working on potential benchmarks, right? And that's where I think even the other regulators across the country are looking at, because we have the ability as California, and by the way, California is the largest insurance market in the country, 4th in the world. So if we can get this right, surely the rest of the regulators are going to follow, especially like-minded states already like New York, Illinois, Washington, and Oregon. So everybody's waiting to see what this data is going to look like, so then we can start working on not only state goals but national goals through the National Association of Insurance Commissioners.
Thank you. Excited. Can't wait to get to see the data. Chair Randolph, there's many aspects to advancing clean trucks, but how well aligned the growth of the percentage of zero emission trucks and the growth in charging infrastructure, and what other things are you and your team thinking about as we move towards the leadership, not just in California, but of course the impact that has nationally?
Yeah, the infrastructure conversation is very front and center as part of ARB's work right now. We know that the charging infrastructure is not where we need it to be, and we know it needs to move faster. But it's really presenting some interesting challenges. As I mentioned, we are ahead of our goals, which means that EV adoption has really moved forward very quickly, both in the light duty and the medium and heavy duty space. So as a result, we really need to accelerate the infrastructure piece. And I feel for the utilities in our state, because they are having to deal with mitigating climate change impacts at the same time as they're trying to adapt to climate change impacts, right? So they are hiring or contracting with hundreds of people to harden their infrastructure and prevent wildfires. And at the same time, we also need them to hire hundreds or contract with hundreds of people to build the EV infrastructure. And so that's what we're really kind of pushing them to do. And also, as was mentioned earlier, forward planning is a big piece of it. Trying to understand, where the infrastructure needs are going to be. And there's a lot of, interagency coordination at the state level, and some innovations that have been adopted. So, for instance, the Public Utilities Commission now has a project where it's working with the investor-owned utilities to identify the areas on the grid where they see heavy-duty vehicle infrastructure being needed in the shorter term, so that they can start to devote resources to that planning. And so trying to do more of the upfront work and, building to the future. The demand forecasts that the Energy Commission does now take into account the progress that we anticipate as a result of our regulatory work. And so this is something that we are talking to the federal government about, trying to get the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation to be thinking about, how can they work with other states who are making this transition, and give them the confidence that there are some lessons learned that we can deploy from California, so that utilities around the country can be ready to deploy those lessons learned. And kind of as their adoption starts to pick up faster, getting that forward planning process in place, and thinking about ways that they can deploy their infrastructure even faster.
Yeah, it's so critically important. We, with your colleagues at the California Energy Commission support, we did LACI and TEP did a blueprint for the 710, and we not just looked at where there's available power and where the trucks are going, but we also worked with a frontline group to see where would they prefer the trucks to go and the charging to be placed, so that reduces some of that truck traffic on residential streets. Even though it's zero emissions and quieter and less vibration, it's still a big truck on the road. So that's a piece, and we just shared it, that study with Drew Kojak at the White House. He's looking at the truck charging stuff from the White House perspective. Amy, talk to us a little bit more about sort of the decarbonization goals and some of the, how does the insurance industry tackle this? Do companies like Allianz know how they're going to achieve these things, and what's that path look like?
If that's an invitation to geek out, I mean,
yeah, please. This is a geek crowd. We got.
A group of insurers back in July 2021 formed, under the auspices of the United Nations, the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, similar to the Net Zero Banking Alliance, similar to the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. That group expanded to 30 at the peak of this year, sort of at Easter time. And then they received a letter accusing them of antitrust, which means that the group largely fell apart. There are a few insurers left in it, rather unkind to say, kind of the rats and mice are still left in it. The large insurers have left. But the insurers have not moved back from their commitments. So that didn't happen. It was just acting collectively was challenged. So what had that group done? They had commissioned PCAF, the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, to come up with a carbon accounting framework for insurance-related emissions. So if you think about the banking sector, counting their carbon footprint is relatively straightforward. You want to borrow $10 million for your beachside pad. If a bank lends you $1 million, they know their... no, you want 12? Okay, whatever. A bank lends you $1 million, they know they're financing 10% of the emissions involved in the construction. So that accounting is relatively straightforward. With insurance, if you think about the emissions footprint of a business, how do you allocate the amount of emissions between a property, a casualty, a D&O, and auto? How are those emissions generated is one complexity. Secondly, the insurance industry was very concerned that they would be found liable for climate change for financing emissions effectively, even though it's contingent finance. So they didn't even like the idea of coming up with some notional split between different lines of insurance. So they came up with a formula. Whatever formula they came up with was going to be flawed, but the formula they've come up with is really quite flawed. However, it's what's being used. So the formula is premiums divided by greenhouse gas emissions divided by revenues. And so there are factors in that have nothing to do with decarbonisation. The most obvious example is in the oil and gas industry. If you think about an oil and gas company's revenues are really largely dependent on the commodity price. It's got nothing to do with decarbonisation. So if the commodity price goes through the roof, revenues go through the roof, that means their carbon footprint, their insurance carbon footprint goes down just because they earned more money. Or you can have fluctuations in premiums, and our premiums are very cyclical, and those fluctuations in premiums result in a change in the amount of carbon that insurers account for. Now, when I challenge the folk with that, they say, whatever we came up with, it was always going to be flawed, we need something, and I don't dispute that. We cannot let perfection be the enemy of the good. And they say, but if we're all accounting on the same basis, then those fluctuations will be normalized between insurers. I think the challenge with that is NGOs won't accept that. If an insurer's carbon footprint changes in the wrong direction because of economic nor the regulator. Yeah, touche. And so we've got this mechanism that has some inherent flaws, but that's the formula that they're using. I can't remember what the formula is for privately owned vehicles because I spend my time advising clients, but certainly for corporate fleets, that's what they'll use. So that all sounds well and good, but then how do you even get the GHG? Do you count scope 1, 2, and 3, or just 1 and 2? And the framework is vague on that. It says you have to count scope 1 and 2, 3 where it's available and robust. So different insurers are having different scopes. Again, another source of variation. Also, how many companies have that GHG information? The insurers are rightly trying, and I'm talking largely about European insurers here, the US insurers. The only US insurer that I'm aware of, Liberty maybe, AIG and Liberty I think are the only insurers who've actually made a net zero commitment. Chubb have made some other commitments that are very sort of supportive of the environment, but largely US insurers are absent from this conversation. But if we think about, was that the wrong thing to say?
No, okay. He said for now.
Okay. So if we think about actually getting that information, the insurers are largely trying to make it easy for their clients. So they're buying this information. They're buying from data providers who probably are buying the information from CDP, and so they can ingest it. Well, that's fine for companies of the scale that they're reporting to CDP or putting GHG in the public domain, but we're going to have a lot of SMEs and smaller companies that isn't the public domain, and the insurers haven't got a good answer for that yet. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of the mechanics, but the European insurers are committed to it. Well, sorry, completely wrong. There are Australian, there are quite some very large Japanese insurers, there are Brazilian insurers, there are Chinese insurers. It's just the Americans who are missing.
Gosh, surprising. Pam, thank you very much, Amy. Talk to us a little bit how the transition to heavy-duty ZEVs compares to the transition with light-duty transition. Any observations or thoughts, and what can we learn?
Yeah, I think two things I'll say. First, we we sort of have a lack of models, right? That's one issue on the medium and heavy duty side that that we're sort of currently wrestling with. But much like the transition to light duty vehicles, we are seeing that change and seeing that change pretty rapidly. So over the last 7-10 years, from on the light duty vehicle side, really gone from 0 to 60 in terms of the consumer choice and the availability of a whole range of different models. We are starting to see that same thing happen on the medium heavy duty side. The statistic that I'll share is a 625% increase in models since 2019, which is a CalSTART statistic. I'm not sure how many models we started with in 2019, but that's a pretty significant jump, and that's being obviously driven by demand on the larger corporate fleet side. FedEx has just made the zero emission commitment by 2040 for global transportation network. That's going to be very significant in terms of creating that sort of clarity and demand that will help the auto manufacturers, and truck manufacturers invest in diversifying the model availability. And Amazon just made the commitment. I think they're bringing on 100,000 Rivian into their fleet. Not nearly enough. Too little, too late. The huge investment from a few years ago. I see those delivery trucks in my neighborhood all the time, and I'm pretty angry about the fact that they're not electric. They really could have done a lot a few years ago, but we are where we are and making progress. So that's maybe one thing that I'll note that's sort of different and is challenging now, but we've got lessons learned from from the light duty side that give us some confidence that we're going to get what we need. The other thing that is maybe more different on the different angle is just how critical it is to make as much progress as we possibly can, as quickly as we can with these fleets, because they are so long lasting. They are going to be on the road for an incredibly long time, and in some ways, light duty vehicles sort of. There's a cars sort of move through the cycle a little bit differently, but there's not really a way to compare how quickly the light duty vehicle fleet turns over compared to the heavy duty vehicle fleet. So we really need to get moving, and there's a lot of good signs right now in the market. The big corporate suppliers are gonna make a big difference, and then sorting out some of these issues, infrastructure, cost, the sort of insurance piece that's critical. All of these things will help us move as fast as we can with this largest new growing source of GHGs.
Yeah, thank you. A few of this room probably have had conversations with an unnamed air regulator who was pushing for natural gas trucks for a very long time to achieve NOx compliance for Southern California. And the argument response was, those trucks should be on the road for a very long time. Why are we going to invest in that? And thankfully, those tunes have changed.
It's like 15 to 20 years or something. I mean, it's very long.
So I wanted to turn back to the panel before we see if there are any questions from the audience. Well, I had one specifically for you, Leanne, and if you had anything else you want to say, please just feel free to ignore my question. But when we've been talking to these cities like District of Columbia, New York City, and who want advanced zero emissions delivery, their hope is LA, the cities coming together, can help show a little market force to the Amazons and the FedExes, like prioritize these cities where there's more trucks, per capita probably, and more intensity of operations. But they also struggle with trucks coming into DCs from Maryland or in New York, of course, New Jersey. How do you see the ACT rule and the other states that are adopting it helping in that regard? And while California doesn't quite face that same challenge, I'm sure there's some of that leakage sort of concerns. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, we're working hard to try to get as many states to adopt ACT and ACF as we can. We in California, we're sort of used to this idea that we are regulating for California, and we impact markets across the country. But there are still many states that are not doing much, and the federal government is considering their Phase 3 GHG standard for heavy duty. A little concerned that rule is not going to turn out to be as strong as it really needs to be. So having national action is great, and I'm so excited about the support the Biden administration has provided around infrastructure and their light duty standards. I just really want to make sure they have the right kind of ambition in their heavy duty standards. The other thing I will say is, this, to the earlier point, like, this deployment is happening. I've taken, in the last few months, I think in like October and November, I've taken 3 trips through the Central Valley. Every single trip, I have seen one of the Pepsi Frito-Lay zero-emission trucks just randomly doing its routes back and forth. They have a fleet of big old Tesla semis that are zero emission in the valley, in our
I think in Modesto, right?
Yeah.
My
So I was in
hometown, where I grew
Modesto.
up.
I was
Very proud.
driving through on my way to Yosemite, and I saw some. Schneider Trucking has a big old fleet of Daimler trucks. So this transition is happening, and we just need to continue to support it. And like I was saying earlier, remove as many barriers as we can. And as we see that success, then other states will want to hop on and share in that success, because they want to see those trucks on their roads. They don't want them all to come to California. So if you're in a state that wants some zero-emission trucks, adopt advanced clean trucks and advanced clean fleets, and they will come.
That's great. When I was in the mayor's office, I emailed, we were struggling with trying to get the Port of LA to, so this was probably 5, 6 years, 7, 8 years ago, whatever it was. And I emailed Elon Musk and said, "Hey, could you help us figure out how to do, how to get the ports?" He's like, "I'm too busy, but I got something that we're going to announce soon that should help." That was like a couple months before the semi. But thankfully, others are really stepping in as well, Daimler most particularly. Insurance Commissioner Amy and Pam, one other thought that came to mind is California's climate disclosure law. You were sort of, I think, talking to it a little bit indirectly, but how are you seeing that change the tenor of the conversation, whether it's American insurers or others that do business in California?
No, absolutely. That was a critical legislation. But even before that, a year before that, with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners working on, we've had for years some sort of climate survey that wasn't tied to TCFD. And so what we did quickly when we got involved was not only have the NAIC vote to approve the new TCFD standard with specific additional insurance questions, which was a big win for us. And we started with 7 states. We're up to 27 states now, bipartisan, that represent 85% of the entire market, in the insurance market in the country. And that was a big win for us. And the first test to really see if we can coordinate as state regulators. And Amy's absolutely right about the fact that our U.S. insurers are really seriously lagging behind. And this is why, again, the data is critical so that regulators can start, in my opinion, and being bold here, working on mandates. We're not going to get insurers to just out of the goodness of their heart. Insurers traditionally are very conservative and slow and moving, and it isn't until the big, larger states start working on mandates where you bring them, when you really bring them to the fray and to start working on their climate goals, especially we talk to net zero. So one of the big things we've just announced yesterday as well is that we are hosting in Los Angeles for this exact reason. When we look at heavy duty vehicles and EVs, the first ever Global Sustainable Insurance Summit in March in Los Angeles. I have to get to fundraising as soon as possible when I get home. But working with the UN PSI on launching this summit in Los Angeles, because I want insurers to look at what is really happening, not only the innovation, around in Southern California, but get them to understand the impacts that they can do around the 710, around these communities. And one of the big components of that is not only our net zero goals, but again, launching our first ever sustainable insurance strategy, national strategy now, to get our domestics in line to what the work that we're doing. So that is a big win for us. We launched it yesterday with UNPSI. The data call is going to just continue to serve as that benchmark to get us to start working on mandates. That's how we're going to get this done. I mean, we've done this in California for years. They'll fight and fight us tooth and nail, but eventually they're going to adapt because our market, and this is the other key thing when I look at and talk to other regulators from smaller insurance markets, they're like, look, if, no offense, if Rhode Island tries to do something, they're going to be like, go screw yourself, you know? But if then California, New York, Illinois, Washington, Oregon, we start working together, then that sends the signals because absolutely right, our European counterparts, Australian and Asian counterparts are way ahead. And many of those companies are the parent companies of our domestic insurers, which is another strategy that I use when we're talking to the U.S. insurers. So we got this summit coming in March that's going to start setting the foundation. We have the data hopefully coming way before then to allow us to give us clear benchmarks so that we're getting to a point where the U.S. insurers are starting to not only engage, but we're going to be forced to engage with the regulator, with nonprofits, and get us to a point where we're hopefully one day at par to what the European, Australian, and Asian counterparts are doing.
Very exciting. I'll just say, you know, the other part of our work at LACI is working with entrepreneurs as well as workforce training, but market, you know, the policies and mandates send market signals to entrepreneurs to respond to. And they find, that's how we find the innovations that have been coming to the fore, is thanks to the leadership of ARB, the insurance commissioner, the legislature, the governor, to really call upon that innovation. And when you have your summit, be sure to do a field trip to LACI, and we can show them a couple of our startups that are doing truck retrofits, which if you bring some insurers, we need to get them to scale because onesies, twosies, and dozens aren't going to get us there in solutions, but it is a part of the solution. And your staff have been great to help us figure out how to help them navigate the way without getting into the chassis concerns, I think, with some of their previous retrofits. But Pam or Amy, anything to add on the carbon disclosure or any other closing thoughts?
The commissioner covered it well. It's a groundbreaking policy. You know, if you can't manage what you can't measure, right? And as an advocate, as an NGO, I haven't met a mandate I don't like, so I'm super excited that that's where we're headed. And you know, on the way towards the mandates, it really gives. I think it will start to give companies the tools that they need to actually deal with the rhetorical commitments that folks are making without a real sort of clarity and understanding of their risk and their impact. There are benefits for voluntary carbon markets. I mean, there's sort of a wide range of opportunities here on the voluntary side, on the corporate side, and then obviously getting us towards in a whole range of sectors, the better information, better data, and potentially helping us build alliances for mandates as folks really start to grapple with what their internal risk is. So it's exciting.
And then I just say, so delighted to see the reporting requirements. I find that really exciting. But the thing that is still missing is a framework for assessing the quality of a transition plan. And it's such heavy lifting. It's fine if you're Bank of America and you have an internal team and you can ingest this information. But for the insurance companies to have to figure out if it's any good or not, or if the CapEx committed has got a cat and hell's chance of delivering the goals, we need to have I know there are real risks to being reductive, but there are some areas that if we're going to move with speed, I think we do need to be a bit more reductive, to come up with a grading mechanism that says this one is an A star or a D minus. So that's one point I'd make. We've talked a lot about demand signal as well and how important the demand signal is for the manufacturers. The demand signal is also really important for insurers. A lot of the insurers started off thinking about net zero by saying no, we're not going to write coal, no, we're not going to write Arctic drilling, and having those prohibitions. But actually, as important, more important, it is, yes, how are we going to support new technologies? How are we going to support risks that are that's scaling up? And actually, the insurers are now getting to that place. They don't quite know how they're going to do it, so I'm not saying that there's a silver bullet, but the insurers philosophically are pivoting now to a yes.
Great, thank you. We have a couple minutes left. Let's see if there's any questions in our esteemed audience. Any plants? There we go.
Yes.
I'll be a plant. Hi, and thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you being here. I'm Kara Horowitz. I'm from UCLA School of Law, and my question is about what academics and universities can do to support this work, if anything. I really appreciate the work of those, especially in California. I'm happy to hear you're focusing on Los Angeles in particular, Commissioner. I heard talk of maybe data gaps or the value of sharing models across jurisdictions. So tell us what we should be doing to help you, please.
So one of the big things that we lay out in our national strategy is the fact that we need to collaborate better with academia. With the fact that we still it's very difficult in the U.S. to find climate finance experts when it comes to the insurance sector. And how do we start building a school of thought in terms of how do we develop the workforce for the future when it looks like even a department of our size, 1,400 employees at the Department of Insurance, yet we are now looking at having to verify catastrophic models. We now have to figure out how are we forecasting climate risk and putting a monetary amount to that in the insurance sector. And these are things that are innovative and far-reaching, but we severely lack the workforce to be able to help us. How are we going to create new insurance products to meet these needs? When we look at parametric insurance products or climate insurance products that we're doing, there's very few universities that even are starting to think about how do we create new areas of studies around climate risk financing for insurance companies, and how do we develop those skills? So part of our strategy is to working hand in hand with academia in our country so that we start developing this important workforce. That's one thing for us. We've done a lot of work in collaboration with various UCs in the state looking at scenario analysis, creating a framework for other insurance regulators to follow, because they might not have the wherewithal to figure out how do we do scenario analysis and how do we verify that. We did a study with UC Berkeley around that and creating a framework around what other insurance regulators can utilize. So I think the technologies and the thoughts are moving ahead, but as a regulator, we need to start working on developing the workforce that's going to be able to, one, understand, verify the work that's being done for our public service workers. And I'll give you another example of that. We're starting to tackle AI in insurance, and can you imagine? We have civil servants who we're trying to figure out, how do we regulate AI, And so we're out there again looking at how do we start developing, whether through grants or initiatives, to start creating a workforce to start helping us in the public service sector to be able to regulate these big challenges that we have coming forward, because the insurance companies, again, will be able to have that bandwidth and say, use this catastrophic model for wildfires. This is, it's going to be perfect. But if we don't have the manpower, the people power, or be able to verify, how do we make sure this is not being used again to discriminate who gets insurance or who doesn't? So we're going to have to start creating a public model to be able to be the benchmark. But how do we do that if we don't even have the folks to start looking at that now? So those are really critical components that our department's working at how do we start engaging academia more to start building the workforce of the future to meet these needs that we have moving forward.
I'd also like to see a piece of research on perverse outcomes. So if we take things like reverse condemnation in California and the challenges that creates. So we did a lot of work to see if we could try and get insurance to contractors who are doing vegetation management. And they're almost uninsurable because of the liability regime. So it doesn't mean that the liability regime is flawed, but there are some perverse, some unintended consequences that are preventing climate action. So actually to have a thoughtful academic piece of work to say, these are some policies that have merit, however, there is a perverse unintended consequence that is slowing our progress, whether it's around mitigation or adaptation, I think would be really powerful.
Matt,
Correct. Yes, sir.
I want to just ask one quick question of
Please.
Amy. If I know
Mike Swords, please. Floor is
Yeah.
yours.
So Amy, did I hear you correctly when you said that your company charges a higher premium for lithium-ion vehicles than
First of all, I
other
should have said, so
technologies?
we're a broker, we're an intermediary rather than the capital provider. But the risk that insurers are worried about is the risk of thermal runaway from lithium-ion batteries, from the explosion, from the toxic nature of fumes because the gas is associated with lithium-ion. When you get to solid state, so much of that risk goes away that I don't think we have any. Do we have any HGVs running on solid state? I mean, Toyota's going to come out with some passenger EVs soon, but I think when
Soon.
soon.
We'll see.
Open-ended soon. So I think, yeah.
That's fair for Toyota to say that, yes.
But the point being that the challenge with insurance isn't necessarily an EV, it's a lithium-ion challenge, and with different batteries, with different risk characteristics, we may not have the same challenges.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's true in the utility storage area as well. Like their fire issues have been lithium-ion, and there are other storage technologies that are coming to the market.
I just think with everything we talk, we have to be so careful with our vocabulary. Commissioner and I were talking before about how people talk about ESG and climate, and it's really unhelpful because, and so I think when we talk about the EV issue, like it's not an EV issue, it's a lithium-ion problem.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank our amazing panelists, Insurance Commissioner Chair Randolph, Amy, Pam, I forgot your name, jet lag. Thank you so much. It was a great conversation, and appreciate you being here, and to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much.